Hi everyone, TSW here. Thank you for checking out this video of how to tank Kara. Maybe you're more interested in how to heal Kara. Check the pinned comment and the description. There'll be a link to my how to heal Kara video. So with that underway, let's start with how to tank Kara. Before we get to Attuman, we're going to have some trash. We're going to have the Spectral Stable Hands, which cast a heal that can be easily interrupted. We have the Spectral Chargers, which will charge somebody at range and also immediately fear when the charge happens. So you can all just stack on the Spectral Charger to have him not charge, and there also will not be a fear. But to play it safe, you can drop your Tremors, have Tremors in both groups if you have two Shamans. We also have the Spectral Stallion, which has a stacking buff to increase damage, but it doesn't really hit very hard. So just generally speaking, the Spectral Chargers will charge in fear, and the Spectral Stable Master will do the heal. You can of course shackle any of this trash if you so wish. But again, they don't hit particularly hard, so you can get away with it. Just make sure you're demo raw, demo shouting, and hopefully you've got a paladin with you who will be doing the majority of the tanking. However, you do want to be taunting one or two mobs off the paladin potentially, because this early into classic, the damage on the paladin can be enough to have them die. So make sure the demo shout raw is up. Also, as Taurens, you can use War Stomp to help relieve that incoming damage on your other tank, as well as yourself if you're tanking multiple mobs. In terms for gear for the boss Attuman, you essentially want to, if this is your first foray into raiding in TBC, you can go as tanky gear as you feel comfortable using. If it's your very first raid with very low geared friends in the raid, you can go full out mitigation, but bear in mind that the boss is taunt immune, and there is a curse that will be thrown out throughout the fight, which will increase your chance to miss. This needs to be decursed ASAP on the tanks from a druid or a mage. The majority of the time as a warrior or druid, you'll probably be tanking midnight as seen in the video. If you are picking up the huntsman, you just want to save a shield slam or a mangle ready to pick it up, again because these mobs are immune to taunt. When tanking the huntsman, just make sure he's tanked slightly away from the others. You can do this either just by dragging him away or by facing him away. The important factor to consider is the cleave that the huntsman will do. It doesn't hit for a huge amount, but if you're here particularly for the first time, it can potentially kill you if you're very low geared or your healers are badly geared. Midnight also does a knockdown, so you can't always be spamming your abilities when you're knocked. So in conjunction with the curse, which reduces your chance to hit, your threat can be very limited. Threat is the number one reason for wiping on Attuman. The damage isn't particularly high, but the fact that you're getting knocked down and not being able to use your spells, and the curse, which if it isn't decursed instantly from the tanks, can really reduce your threat. So focus on dealing as much threat as you can. Be vocal if you're noticing anybody on the threat meter who's chasing you or going over you. And then in this phase where the huntsman and midnight come together, that's a threat reset. You definitely need to be saving your mangle maul combo to pick it up with a good amount of threat, or your shield slam heroic strike combo to pick it up as soon as possible. You do not want people to be damaging immediately or landing a big heal and you be rage starved and you not being able to pick up the mob. It's also a great time to receive a misdirection from a druid. I also stop attacking if I'm well ahead on threat on midnight, just so I have a full rage bar as well as mangle available to use. So one thing I'd always recommend to anyone tanking is to keybind your marking. So skull, cross, triangle, etc. need to be keybound. You can do this in the keybind sections under targeting. So what you can see me doing now is finding all of the patrols, and I'm just giving them an arbitrary mark just so that they're more obvious when they're walking by, so you can pick them off at the most convenient time for you and not accidentally chain mobs and have a big headache. So this room is fantastic for using a paladin tank. The rest of the dungeon is fairly straightforward. If you were to have a warrior druid combo tanking it, this is the only area where it's a little bit scary, just because of the sheer quantity of big pulls that you'll be getting in this area before Moroes. So the Phantom Valet, as you can see here, hits moderately hard on some private servers. They've hit considerably harder, but it's all good. It's all good. So you're just going to want to be picking up these non-elite packs in no particular order. Just make sure that you're not pulling 2 packs at once, and you can see here I'm confident to just pick up this servant. It's the elite, so everything here is non-elite except for the servant. Because I know I'm going to get questions about it, the nameplate add-on is called Plater. You can also use threat plates. I've not used threat plates yet. I'm using Plater for now. So these packs have a Phantom Attendant. So the important mob here is the Spectral Retainer. So these Spectral Retainers are mobs that you want to single target down first before you're AoEing, ideally, because these mind control the mob. You can see our Resto Shaman there being mind controlled. So you want to kill the Retainer, and you can purge the Retainer as well from somebody in your raid, because he has a hot which will heal him. So kill the Retainer first, and then hopefully you can avoid some of the mind controls if the Retainer doesn't do a very quick mind control. So again, the Retainers there are the important mobs to mark skull and have people nuke. You can see more marked mobs coming into the fray. These are just additional patrols which are walking towards us that are easy to get. I also jump on this skeletal waiter and pull him, even though we've got people dying. We're wanting to go kind of quickly, or at least I am. So even though we've got people dying, it's nice to grab that skeletal waiter because he has quite a long path in Moroes' room. Also, speaking of which, somehow we were able to get world 20th speedrun in this Kara group. Despite wiping on Nightbane quite a few times. So again, here's another pack. We have the Spectral Retainer. It's marked skull by me and my keybind. We're ready to pull it, and then hopefully in a second we see the throwing weapon being out. Using a throwing weapon is really convenient as a warrior because you're able to make the pull quicker. You don't have to draw the bow of a crossbow or a bow or a gun. It's just a case of throw, and you immediately are in combat with that mob and it will run towards you. So again, you saw us just kill that mind control mob. Really easy. We didn't even get to mind control. That's the reason why you kill it first. Okay, let's jump on some new packs. So again, you don't need to pull the skeletal waiter with additional mobs. However, we are choosing to just because we know we can get away with it. So skull on the skeletal waiter. The skeletal waiter can do a very nasty debuff. So what we do to counteract that is we chain stun. So start perhaps with a Paladin Hammer of Justice, then a Warrior Concussion Blow or a Druid Bash, and then follow it up perhaps with a Hunter's Pet Stun. The reason you want to stun the skeletal waiter is because you want to basically keep them busy, keep them unable to use their debuff. So they've got a Brittle Bones debuff. So it's a 2-part debuff. One of them just lasts 2 minutes and it makes you periodically have the second debuff. The second debuff being the most important or the most deadly one, and that's when it turns your armor to 0. So that's very deadly. So these skeletal waiters, it's so important that you can avoid the debuff. If you do get the 2-minute debuff, you want to just either have the other tank take over, or you might consider a 2-minute break, or you can also just try and continue tanking. But with 0 armor, your chance of dying is massive, particularly against these ghostly stewards. Let's just look at the next pack of ghostly stewards and I'll explain what the ghostly stewards do. Ghostly stewards, ghostly stewards. Okay, so these are taunt immune, so be careful. At 50% HP, they will enrage, increasing the damage they deal, and they can also stun their target. So once the mobs are about 50% HP, you need to call for max rank heals and big heals on you as the tank. And if you are receiving the stun as well, then you can actually die straight up tanking one of these ghostly stewards. Also be careful because they are taunt immune, that DPS don't go too hard and over aggro. So here we are on Moroes now. If you're running with a paladin, you essentially just want to pick off Moroes and maybe another mob off them. This fight is not particularly hard. It's one of the fights where going into Classic we thought it would be a lot harder than it is, but if you've got a Paladin it's fairly straightforward. The most important mobs you need to worry about as a raid are the priests that can mana burn and the arms warrior who wields an axe for the whirlwind. As melee you can get destroyed fairly quickly if you're not aware that you're stood in the whirlwind. So there's the whirlwind going off, and before you know it all of the ads are dead. The most important thing on Moroes is that you have 2 tanks, top and second on threat, because Moroes will gouge his main target, the one he's being tanked by, and then go on the person second on threat. The gouge lasts 6 seconds, I believe, so that's 6 seconds where someone else is tanking Moroes. Okay, so you see the warrior's got the gouge here, and then the gouge ends, and then he returns back onto me on the warrior. So what you can do is ask for misdirections. I mean, a lot of the time you want to misdirect on the pull, but if you have multiple misdirections or during the battle at the start when you have all the ads, you need to keep a mindful note that you need to be pumping threat not only into the ads if you're tanking the ads, but also Moroes, because in this final stage where the ads are dead, you can't have DPS getting a bit trigger happy and then going above you on the threat meter. Additionally, you can call them out and say, hey, stop doing damage please, because you're going to die once the current tank gets gouged. There's quite a lot to say on Moroes, so we'll see it again from the druid point of view. The pickup being the most important thing. Here again I'm rolling with a paladin, so it makes it a little bit easier in terms of pickup. But if you're completely doable with a warrior druid, it's just that your damage will need to be a little bit more considerate for AoE threat, as well as your healers. You need to make sure that you're obviously dealing more threat than the healing from the healers. So let's do a bit of a play-by-play. So I'm getting a misdirection from the hunter. Hopefully that's the hunter's dealing damage into Moroes. So I'm getting threat on Moroes from the misdirect. I'm just throwing in a few lacerates, making sure that I've got good threat on Moroes, because obviously if any of the mobs slapping anyone in the raid is going to be a one-shot, it's going to be Moroes. What I can do again is if the paladin tank is dropping low, I can just target one of them and throw a taunt. I can also go for a bash just to relieve either like a heal that might need to be interrupted, or just to make sure that there's not so much damage going out on the tanks. You see that Moroes goes for the vanish there, giving us more time to just focus on the ads. You can of course shackle these ads as is traditional, but it's not, as you see here, mandatory for our group. I'd say if you're going into Kara fresh, or if you're really wanting to prepare the best you can, definitely assign some forms of CC. However, it's not that, it's a bit of a letdown, to be honest with you, in terms of encounters. It is a little bit too easy. But you can see that I was trying to drag Moroes towards the end there into the consecration of the paladin. This will give him an easier chance of being second on threat. Again, if your MD from the hunter comes off cooldown, 2-minute cooldown, or if you have multiple hunters in the group, this would be the time to misdirect Moroes onto the off tank, the paladin. And also be looking at your threat meter. For example, Mord X, you can see is starting to climb above our paladin tank. Now, as mentioned earlier, we know what's going to happen if someone over aggroes the second tank. So the gouge is about to occur, and Moroes is going to turn, target Mord X, slap him down in 2 melee swings down to like 1% HP. He goes into bear form and somehow survives, but generally speaking that's not going to be a survivable outcome over aggroing the second tank. Next up, we're on the trash before Maiden. There's a really good line of sight spot that you can use here where I am now, any range mobs will come around the corner and be nice and stacked. This is great for having them run into the consecration, or if you're dropping engineering, just good for AoE in general. Get all the mobs stacked. Good for the seeds as well. If your seed of corruption from your warlocks isn't attacking all the mobs, you end up with 2 mobs remaining, and then it's a bit clunky, a bit slow if you're having to kill them afterwards, after the bulk of the pack is dead. Also, they're probably aggroed on healers because no one's in melee range tanking them. Again, Phantom Valet is going to be pulled, just pull it back, easy peasy. There's also another line of sight here in this corner. Drag all these mobs. This is a non-elite pack, but it's nice just to have them all in together. And as you can see, just blow them up with all the AoE you have. I don't necessarily mark all of the patrolling trash in this room because there's not as much of it, and also you're not coming straight off a boss like when I was marking them before Moroes after Attuman. And then you can just keep pulling mobs into this room as you like. It gives you a nice line of sight, and the raid can just continue drinking here as you keep supplying them wave after wave of mobs. So killing these next mobs, we have the concubines and the wanton hostesses. The wanton hostesses, you don't want to be stacking them on the raid because they have an AoE silence, as well as 2 auras, one reducing magic damage by 50% and one reducing physical damage by 50%. So it's good practice just to keep the wanton hosts away from the raid. And the concubine demon does a very interesting ability, the seduction, at around 50%. It's a very fast cast and you can stun it to avoid this mechanic completely. There are 2 patrols around this hallway, so just be careful you don't be caught off guard. If in doubt, pull everything back to where you see the doorway just behind us, the entry that you come to this room. Just pull everything back there consistently and the patrols won't be a problem. The worst thing you can do is, if you're new here, is be running up to the mob packs, tanking them there, and then all of a sudden fresh mobs start joining you and you get overwhelmed. Again, the concubine is a demon and can be therefore banished, and the wanton hostess, they're undead and can be shackled. This is a big pack of 4, so you can easily get away with, if you've got 1 priest and 1 warlock, 1 banish and 1 shackle. And before you know it, you'll be at Maiden, which is a fairly straightforward fight. She's a paladin, she has a consecrate, she has a repentance, and she has a holy nova. So the most important thing for you is to be aware when she does her repentance. So it's a half-second cast she does, which will make the whole room CC'd. So your important thing to bear in mind is your healers want to be healing you. So when the repentance goes out, what you can do is just drag Maiden over towards your repented healers, and then she'll do a consecration, and then that will then break the repentance, and then you can start receiving heals again. You want to be using cooldowns when your healers are repented, just to make sure that you're not dying. Also, ideally you're standing max melee range, as are the other melee. Because of her Holy Wrath ability, it increases the damage dealt the more players it hits. So you can't just all stand in her consecration range and avoid the repentance. You can see here the repentance just went out. I'm moving towards the healers to break the repentance, but unfortunately, because it's a fairly straightforward fight, she dies before you can really see the mechanic too much. Okay, so pressing on. These skeletal ushers. Now what you want is to have ideally all of your shamans in one group. We're all in group 2. We have the tanks and the shamans in group 2. They're dropping a grounding totem before we even pull the pack, so the grounding totem starts using its cooldown time. And these skeletal waiters will use an ice tomb, which will CC the tank, and you can't remove it. What you can do, however, is use the grounding totem to get rid of the tomb. They are taunt immune, so if you're tombed, good luck. They also have some kind of like threat drop ability, maybe, kind of, where you won't always necessarily be tanking them. You can try and cleave, swipe, and build aggro on the second one, but it's imperative that you maintain threat on your first target as well. Just in case the other tank gets ice tombed, you can then potentially pick it up yourself instead of it going wild on someone else. Also, there is a patrolling 5th skeletal usher which be walking on this portion of the room. It's completely skippable if you're happy to avoid it. You can see here it's marked skull, and we end up with the call of skipping it. So everyone says skip, skip, skip. We're moving. You're hugging the wall to the right here to avoid all of the mobs in the crowd for the theatre. In this room, you can either just run up yourself and bring the mobs down, or as seen in the footage here, I'm getting a misdirect and a hunter is pulling. These mobs do an AoE when they die, and you're all going to be a little bit stacked if you go up the ramp and kill the mobs where they spawn. So we're pulling these spectral performers down. These are taunt immune, so be careful. They also do a CC magic debuff on you, so you can't do anything until it is dispelled. So dispellers, get ready. If you're a paladin, you can maybe dispel the other guy. They also have these columns of light which increase damage dealt. You can stand in them, or your raid, or the NPC can stand in them, and this will buff their AoE when they die. So you see some people taking damage when they're dying, you just move away from them to avoid the AoE upon their death. Once you have 1 or 2 packs killed, you can then make your way up here and then do the same thing again. As you can see, there's not a lot of room here, which is why you tend to drag them down separately, so you've got more room to work with. They also have in this area a net, which is also a threat drop. So you can either free action potion or get a blessing of freedom from a paladin in order to avoid this. Just to clarify, it's the stagehands that do the net and threat drop, and it's the performance that do the AoE and the column of light. There is a patrol up here, the stagehand, which is avoidable. It's marked cross, and you can simply skip it or kill it. I recommend talking to this NPC and starting the opera event preemptively. You can drag that stagehand patrol in here, you can kill it in here, you can buff in here, get ready for the boss, etc. The important thing, IMO, is to start the event, because you've got a minute or so before the actual boss encounter starts, and it just saves you time. You've got plenty of time to kill the mobs and to buff before the encounter starts. Big bad wolf here, and you can have even more time if you want, because you need to actually speak to the grandmother to trigger the event. You just need to make sure you're dealing plenty of threat on big bad wolf, because after the kiting phase here, you just need to make sure that you're picking up the boss, and it's super duper easy. Luckily, we had a different opera event on the druid. We've got Dorothy, the Wizard of Oz, and it doesn't, again, they don't really hit tremendously hard. Tin Head is the scariest. He can hit quite hard. He also does a cleave, so be careful where you're positioning him. This is the, I'm playing, my druid dinged about an hour before we did this Kara, or 2 hours before we did this Kara, so I'm a little bit scared of the gear level of my druid. So I'm playing very safe, tanking him over to the side. As long as the cleave isn't facing the other tank, or more importantly, the melee DPS, if you have melee DPS, you'll be fine to stack them up. Tito is also the mob I'm tanking in this example. I asked for it to be MD'd to me, and he was MD'd to me. I don't really want to try and pick up mobs that are attacking the range camp, whilst I have Tin Head, a mob that cleaves on me as well. So just be mindful of that. Also, Tin Head has a stacking debuff, which makes him move slower, that allows you to kite him, so it's not that big of a deal if you can kite him and he's not actually melee swinging you because he's not in melee range. That allows you to pick up other mobs, but it's not always going to be the case. Otherwise, it's a fairly straightforward fight. You can just pick up as many mobs as you can. Maybe mark a skull. You can kill Dorothy first if you want. Dorothy has no threat table, so DPS can just destroy her first and give the tanks so much time to pick up threat on the other mobs. And then we have the phase 2, the crone, which is just fairly straightforward. Just avoid the whirlwind going around the room and bring her to 0 HP. I think she also does a chain lightning as well, but it's not too special. Staying with the druid, we have the next room. We have ghostly philanthropists. These are taunt immune mobs, so just be mindful of that. I mark them skull and cross, just so that the raid are aware of which they are, and you can just pick them up and maybe get a misdirect as well, because if people are blasting, you want them to be attacking the tanks. These trapped souls can hit fairly hard, so be careful. They also do a cone of cold similar to a mage, an AoE cone in front of them, so face them away from the raid. And we also have the ghostly haunt, which has a curse similar to Attuman, the huntsman, which will increase your chance to miss, and again can be decursed through a druid or a mage. Again, these mobs do hit hard, particularly with this line of sight finishing off the ramp. You don't want to be line of sighting your healers, so bear that in mind. So jumping back to the warrior, we have these arcane watchmen, which can be stacked together for cleave, and they just do a debuff that does more damage the longer it's on the target. It's nothing to worry about. Just move away from other people because you'll be doing an arcane explosion. Maybe call it out if you're the tank, so melee can stand at max range. Pulling in from the curator's room, we have these arcane anomalies, which are fairly straightforward. Just throw a few attacks on them to have threat. They've got a shield up, so you're actually damaging their mana shield rather than them themselves, although they've got very little HP once the mana shield does go down. And just spam Thunderclap Swipe, fairly self-explanatory. But what is not maybe so obvious is the line of sight that you'll be seeing us do. So we're pulling everything back into this room and line of sighting it, just because the worms do a Mind Flay looking ability. They also do a mana drain, so if you are a paladin, just be conscious of that. Keep your mana high, and when the big guy dies, he also replenishes some of your mana, so make sure that you're nearby to benefit from that if you are low on mana. The second line of sight point is where I'm stood now. You want to make sure the raid is line of sighting Curator, because you will pull Curator here if you're stood where that arcane anomaly is on the right hand side. Curator does walk quite far forward, and he does have a large aggro range, and you can see here that we're having Hunter MD pull back to this position, to this line of sight spot, and again emphasis on everyone being around this corner, including pets, because it is possible to pull Curator. Do you know how I know? This is how I know. You can additionally just drag the mobs to the previous line of sight position as well. So you had a little sneak peek of Curator there. So here we go, the Curator battle. I like tanking him a 90-degree angle here, although it really doesn't matter. You're just going to be doing your normal tankiness over here. He's going to spawn astral flares. So if you want to be lazy as a DPS, you can make a macro /target astral flare. I don't think it's lazy, actually. I think it's quite a good idea. And you can just get on the Astral Flare straight away. As an off-tank here, you can either help kill the Astral Flares, or you can just stay full-time on the boss and try and be second on threat, because the boss has a Hurtful Strike, a Hateful Bolt, whatever it's called. So the second on threat will be hit periodically through the fight for a medium amount of damage, although it really doesn't matter who it's on. It can be on a healer, it could be on a warlock, doesn't really matter. But if it is on a warlock or a healer, they need to be mindful not to be hit by the Astral Flare's AoE, because the Astral Flare does nature damage. I think it's nature damage, although it would make sense if it was arcane damage, but it's a flare, whatever damage it does. It does AoE damage to anyone nearby. So if you're taking the hateful or the hateful bolt, you're going to also not want to take damage from the astral flare. Although if you're a tank off tanking this, you've got enough HP to tank both. There is actually a threat table for the astral flare, I believe. So if you're quick with a mangle shield slam, you can keep it on next to the boss for cleave damage. Okay, so actually, in terms of things for tanking, just be mindful of the threat table. Not so much in this phase, because people are killing the astral flare, but when the boss evocates, when the Curator runs out of mana, he will evocate. He, she, it will evocate and take double damage. You don't really want to be caught with your pants down when the evocate goes on. You can see I dual wield and swap my weapons around on warrior just so I can do some big damage and thus threat, because when the evocate finishes, you want to make sure that you're still top on threat. The worst thing that can happen is if you're snoozing during the evocate, or if you're trying to do damage on the flare, you can get overtaken by a DPS, and then as soon as the evocate phase ends, Curator runs over and one-shots some of the DPS. Not ideal. So here we are with the Arcane Protectors. This whole room is a little bit slow, but it's not too bad. So these Arcane Protectors will do some sort of reflect. It'll either be melee reflect damage, or magic reflect damage, or ranged physical attack damage, I believe. So just tank it as normal, and just make sure that people are recovered after the Curator fight in order to engage this next trash. I'm one for wanting to pull straight away when perhaps not everyone in the raid is ready. So maybe that's more of a guide for me. He also does the Fist of Stone cast, as you see there, just before he dies. He does about double damage and is kiteable. He does double damage but half movement speed. So if he's got the Fist of Stone cast and buff, you can just run around up and down and avoid all of the damage during the Fist of Stone. If you don't have the damage to kill him quickly, just be mindful of threat if you are kiting him during the Fist of Stone buff. Also, be prepared to use maybe a trinket cooldown or something if you do choose to tank him during the Fist of Stone buff, although it's not quite necessary. So these packs are a bit annoying, mostly for casters, because casters can't hit the small guys. So physical can hit everything, and the casters can't hit these mana feeders. So just be mindful. Also, the mana feeders do a threat drop mechanic, so you need to be aware of that as well. Although we've got 2 hunters and a rogue, so they just melt. But just be mindful if you have a very magic damage heavy composition. These mobs might be up for a little while. Also, in this whole room, be very careful of the patrols. Don't be afraid to play it slow, play it safe, and pull the majority of the room here, because if you can save that one wipe, clearing this whole room will be worth it, okay? So just take it calm and look at the patrols. Maybe you could have a spotter if you're focused solely on tanking. Have someone just look ahead and call if there are things coming nearby. Or you can just position your camera in a intelligent manner so you can see the patrols coming, and pull things back, and maybe call on voice, I'm pulling the mob back. Watch out for people placing totems. If you are pulling back, make sure that they're removing their totems, if that can potentially pull the patrols, because any of this really here with an additional pull, particularly the big guys, it can go from being okay to a wipe fairly quickly. So I've got a bit of a soft spot for this room. I do quite like these mobs. So you want to kill the magical horror first. It does a volley, so it's nice just to get it out of the way. However, the scarier mobs are these mana warps. So when the mana warps get to about 10% HP, they have a cast which will explode for damage. And this AoE damage is... it won't one-shot people, but if they're not full HP, or if they've just taken damage from the magical horror's volley, and then they're hit with this explosion, they will die. So as you saw there, the explosion went off. So when this one goes off, hopefully we get a stun, and there's no explosion. So that's quite good, actually. We failed the explosion for illustrative purposes for this video. That's why we failed on the stun, just for the purposes of this video. We then have this Spell Shade, which is going to be walking around the corner, and I don't have Rage for Mangle, and the Druid dies. Oops. Okay, well, at least you can see how we're line of sighting this Spell Shade, even if it includes a Resto Druid dying. Oops. Next up, we have the Spell Shades. I like to pull them down to where I am now. Just get a line of sight on the ramp, so they're forced to join you on the ramp, and just spam your swipe. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. They're just going to be spamming their ranged abilities. War Stomp is very good here, as well as grenades to interrupt their casts. Very straightforward. Now here's a little line of sight trick I learnt a few years ago. Hop on here, and you'll line of sight all of the mobs in the next room. Very cool, if I do say so myself. And you've just pulled the whole room. Like, these are just easy mobs. I don't even know what these mobs do. They just cast Searing Pain and Fireball or whatever it is. Easy peasy. And then you can jump straight into Illhoof's room. Yay, Illhoof. So you want to line of sight these mobs just so that they're all coming into a nice small pack. So you can AoE them down. And then we're on to Illhoof. So the best place to tank Illhoof is more or less where he stands. There's a bit of a trade-off. You want to have melee not have a massive amount of distance between damaging Illhoof where he is and killing the demon chains. So again, for the sake of DPSs watching, you can do a macro / target demonic chains, and then you'll target the chains when they're up. The best place to... the reason you want the whole raid to be stacked on Illhoof, you can see people aren't necessarily stacked here. But if they get aggro of any of these ads or kill Rex loose, then the imps can quite easily just run around the room a little bit. They are ranged mobs with a range ability, but if they're not killed straight away, they can kind of wander around a little bit. You can see these imps are getting a little bit restless. So if everybody was stacked on the consecration, the imps would be as well. So that's a little optimization there that can be improved for this raid. As for tanking itself, Illhoof is very straightforward. The fight can last a few minutes if you don't have great damage, just to end it quickly. You can solo tank it and tank kill Wreck as well, although it's easier not to. We've got our Paladin tank on kill Wreck, and myself as the warrior is on Illhoof. Once the kill Wreck ad is killed, Illhoof takes a little bit more damage, so you would think maybe that's a good time to use Bloodlust or Heroism, but because the next boss, Shade of Iran, is coming around the corner, you want to not really use Lust or Hero on this boss and save it for the more challenging boss coming next. So Shade of Iran is the fight where I'm making most gear swaps. I'm mostly in DPS gear because Shade of Iran, although he does kind of have a threat table, he doesn't do any melee swings. He did on beta though. But anyway, yeah, he does no melee swings. You're not going to take any damage other than his spell casts or his AoE. Like for right now, we've got the Flame Wreath, so you don't want to move. He does the Blizzard, which you want to avoid. He does the Arcane Explosion, and at 40% HP, he summons Water Elementals. So there's no physical attacks going out. It's all very straightforward for you. So you just can go, you can go more or less full DPS. However, there is a chance that you want to be tanking one or two of the Water Elementals. So these can be banished, feared, and controlled as best you can. However, if you are struggling, particularly for the first kills where you maybe don't have as much DPS as subsequent kills, you can tank them. So this would be a case of you just run over to them, shield slam, mangle, and then stun them. You can line of sight them. So you see all of the pillars with the flames, the torches. You can run around the corners of these areas and line of sight the water elementals that you have threat on. Also a quick note for the healers, you're going to be having healing aggro of the water elementals, so make sure that you're keeping yourself full HP as well. So here are the water elementals. Here they come, they're using their water bolts, they're attacking, look, the Resto Druid, I knew it, and the Resto Shaman, I knew it, because no one's dealing threat to them besides the healers with their healing. You also, if you're a warrior, want to be interrupting. Shade of Iran, I don't really do any interrupting here. Sorry, guys. But yeah, definitely assign one person to interrupt fireballs, one person to interrupt the frostbolts, and then any additional interrupters to be backups also. So you've got the blizzard you need to walk away from, you have the flame wreath where you don't want to move, and then the arcane explosion that you run to the outside of the room. Make sure you don't charge or intercept until he finishes his arcane explosion and the damage actually goes out. And before you know it, Shade of Iran dies. So this is an interesting trash pack. Reminds me of Firemore. So these shades just do normal standard casts, very straightforward. But this Sorceress Shade, the one that is a bit taller than the others, does a volley. So like Firemore, you can line of sight the volley. You can also outrange it as well. So if everybody was stood where the Beastmaster Hunter is at the back of the walkway, they could actually outrange the volley. So I think what I would recommend from now on, because at the moment we're line of sighting the volley from the big shade here, but you can outrange it as well. So it's not too crazy. But just be mindful that you can just bypass this spell shade's mechanics by either line of sighting or outranging. I've actually got a better example of this. It's on my druid on a slightly different area, but it's the same pack. So we've got the consecration getting aggro over all the small ads. I'm going to take the big ad and line of sight him to the top. In the meantime, my mob's just doing volleys. Yeah, not ideal, but I line of sight him at the top, and the paladin is line of sighting his ads at the bottom. So we've got the mobs separated as much as they can be. My mob's line of sighted at the top. This is fantastic. I'm even in range of heals. So this is great. Again, it's not going to be absolutely mandatory. You can just out heal this. But again, if it's your first time here, the best thing to do is just outrange the volley. So frostbolt volley, just outrange it. The range isn't too ridiculous either. No one here is getting hit by it, for example. Although I think it's actually lost here, not outranged. So these ethereal thieves, these are fairly easy mobs. The difficult thing is to not pull more than one at once. Although I think we could probably survive one at once. Just take it easy. So far, I've only pulled one at once, so that's good. Let's see how long I can keep that up for. But they do a disarm. And I think they should do a threat drop, but I haven't noticed any threat drop from them so far. They have a stacking debuff as well. That's an aura, but you don't need to worry too much about that. But if your HP does get too low, you can just stay your distance and reset the debuff. Again, just play it safe, play it slow, and pull one at a time. I'm being a little bit risky running into their room to try and pull mobs. But definitely if it's your first time here, just take it slow and wait for the patrol. Again, just let them patrol. They will separate themselves and you'll be able to pull one at once. Next up, we have these ethereal spell filcher. Sorry, I can't read it on my preview. These are easy mobs. They do some sort of debuff which misdirects heals, but it's not all heals and you'll still be receiving healing. I don't even think I get the debuff here. It just dies. Very straightforward. Let's get on with some chess. Everyone likes a bit of chess, right? Okay, so I'm assuming that you're going to be taking the king as the tank. At least that's what I always do. Don't leapfrog over the pawn in front of you. You want to actually use the pawns to your advantage. So what you essentially, your rotation is essentially bloodlust or heroism, cleave. So bloodlust, cleave, cleave, bloodlust, cleave, cleave, because the cooldown is less on the cleave. You can squeeze 2 cleaves in for every 1 bloodlust. Nice. So what you want is to have the friendly pieces next to you, and then they benefit from your bloodlust or heroism, depending on if you're Horde or Alliance. So you're just there buffing up your pieces with the lust, and your cleave actually attacks mobs 2 squares away from you. So I'm actually hitting the king from my position here, which is very handy, and before that pawn in front of me died, I was buffing 4 chess pieces. So that's really good. There's a lot of DPS output from your side of the board when you're buffing your pieces with the Lust or Heroism. Very useful, and before you know it, the enemy dies. The only way that you can really die to chess is if you Rambo ahead as the king and try and take everything on at once. It's so much better to have the pawns in front of you and to just buff everything around you, and they're kind of like your meat shield, and then you win straight after. Okay, so if you're going to pay attention to anything with regards to trash, I would pay attention now. There is a patrol that goes left to right in this room. You do not want to pull it with these 2 flesh beasts. You want to pull these 2 and the patrol separately, or else you can easily get overwhelmed. These flesh beasts are immune to taunt, and they do a frontal cone bleed. So that's a debuff that they'll do, which deals damage, obviously. Just face them away from everybody else. The 2 tanks can have them facing themselves, but if you're doing this for the first time or on very undergeared people tanking, you can face them away from each other, as you see us doing so here. You see that we're pulling all of these mobs down into the chess board area. This is because, again, they're taunt immune. It gives you a little bit more time to manage the mobs, and it gives you a bit more control. It doesn't take many people dying or wiping for all of this to be worthwhile over the course of many Karas, just having that little extra attention to safety, because you don't want to wipe, obviously, and the run back is very long if you're wiping here. Also, don't pull straight away after doing the chess event, because the whole raid is silenced from completing the chess event. Okay, and again, it's more flesh beasts and another greater before Prince Malchezaar. Let's go. So Prince Malchezaar is quite gear dependent, and you want to tank him where you see me tanking it if you have any melee, and even not, it's just good practice to tank here. That's because on the right hand side between me and the range camp, there's a little break in the wall. This is a line of sight position for the melee to stand so they don't die from the Nova. So to start with, you want to just be pumping as much threat and damage into the boss as possible. This gives you good stead for ready for phase 2 at 60%. So this is the first meteor that goes down. You want to move the boss just a little bit. I would have been safe to have stayed where I am, but this is not a repositioning for my safety. It is a repositioning for the pet's safety. In hindsight, I can see here that the pet there is dying because of the AoE from the meteor. That's not ideal. So he does a knockback as well, the Nova. That's why you're tanking with your back against the wall, so that you negate any kind of knockback. Here's the Nova there. Don't even notice it. It's just 3k shadow damage. I don't care. I'm just happily tanking away merrily. You want to just be keeping up your Demo Shout, Demo Roar and Thunderclap if you're warrior. Also, in phase 2 at least, you're definitely going to be wanting to early on use Commanding Shout as a warrior just to stay alive. Phase 2, again at 60%, is the scary phase. This is when he dual wields and also adds a thrash. Now, a lot of people just think it's parry haste mechanics that you're dying to. No, it's the extra mechanic he gets, which is thrash. So he's attacking 3 times at once. Although a parry haste can theoretically make this a slightly bigger spike of damage, in practice it's not going to be that significant at all, really. Not any more so than any other boss, really. So there's the Shadow Nova with a knockback. Again, I don't really care. If you're melee on this fight, or if you're going for an off-tank position, you'd line of sight where I mentioned at the beginning, or when he's reducing your HP to 0, again as an off-tank or DPS role, you want to be outranging or line of sighting the Shadow Nova when you go to 1 HP. So again, now we've hit phase 2 at 60%. You want to be going full defensive mode. You want your healers to be using their max rank spells. You want nobody else in the raid to really be receiving any heals. You want to be using an armor potion if you are a protection warrior, definitely, and also consuming fully. So the thrash is when he's doing 3 attacks at once, and that's very scary for a huge amount of damage burst on you at the same time. It can be very scary. This is one of the most scary fights for you as a tank. One thing you can also do is he has a Sunder armor in this phase, which can stack, reducing your armor. I've got 1 stack of it so far near the minimap, you can see it. You can use a Paladin's Blessing of Protection to remove the Sunder armor debuffs. However, you do need to make sure before you start the fight that you have a macro, ideally, with /cancel aura, all one word, space, Blessing of Protection. This will mean that, if I use that line in my Mangle or Shield Slam macro, I'm just spamming Mangle or Shield Slam, that I will instantly remove the Blessing of Protection, which removes my Sunder armor debuffs. And then I'm back to tanking again, and it is effectively just removed my Sunder armor debuffs. Also, if you've been looting the books on the floor, try and grab yourself of the Mountain. This is the book that gives you a proc for extra resistance and armor. And then the scary phase, phase 2, it only occurs between 60% HP and 30% HP. So once the boss reaches 30% HP, and as long as everyone's alive, you're in good standing for a kill. However, this is not one of those occasions I die on 10% HP. Be mindful of where the meteors are, because you may need to reposition the boss. Make sure you're in range of healers always, for hopefully obvious reasons, and they need to be calling out if they're needing to move, and you need to be aware of if you're needing to move as well or not. So on to the last 2 dragon bosses. Now Prince Malchezaar is quite a step up in difficulty compared to the other bosses. Now the remaining 2 difficult bosses are Netherspite and Nightbane. So we're using a strategy here that we used on the beta. You don't really have to do everything as we do, but let's go over the baseline abilities first. So the boss will spawn 3 portals. Normally, we'll get onto that. There's currently a bug where sometimes he only spawns 2. But the red beam is the beam that you need to worry about as the tank. You need to find where the red portal is, and you need to position yourself between the boss and the red portal, so that when the red beam spawns, you can take the red beam. So you can see I'm jumping in and out of the red beam. Now it looks a little bit awkward, but there is method to the madness. The red beam will give you 31,000 HP, so all of a sudden you've got a massive health pool. Nice. But the boss does hit quite hard, and the longer you stay in the beam, the less HP you get. So you get a nice big buff of HP, but the longer you stay in the beam, the more debuff stacks you get, and your HP will be dropping and dropping and dropping until you die. Jumping in and out of the beam, as you saw, that means that I don't just take debuff stack after debuff stack. I'm actually having a break between debuff stacks because I'm not always in the red beam, and then it becomes trivial. Now, what I would suggest you do is to spread out during the shadow phase. Okay, we'll talk about the shadow phase again. So we've gone to a shadow phase and we're going back to a beam phase, okay? So I'm now in the green beam, because what normally happens is you'll have 2 tanks alternate. Now, the easiest strategy is just say the tanks alternate. So I started off on red beam and now I'm going green beam. So the easiest and simplest way to set the strategy is the 2 tanks just rotate. One takes green beam first and one takes red beam first. So I'm now on so because I took the red beam first, I'm now taking the green beam, and the other tank can just take the green beam first, and then now he's in the red beam, and it goes like that. Even if they're a paladin, like the green beam reduces your mana pool, which, yeah, as the paladin tank, it's not ideal, but for ease of strategy, the green and the red beam can just be done instantly. The tanks just alternate, easy peasy, you know. And then if you want to know what the blue beam does, the extra beam, it increases damage taken but also damage dealt. So just be careful. Also, you can see void zones. If you're melee, which if you're tanking it, you're going to be, just stand at max melee range or minimum melee range. Just decide which one you want to stand on, because when a void zone spawns, you then need to adjust yourself and you need to stay within melee range. The melee hitbox is quite large, so the boss doesn't need to move if you're tanking him with red beam. If you need to avoid the void zone, you can still be in melee range. So again, I spoke over whilst we had a shadow phase. Let's get some phase 2 action and I'll voice over that. Okay, we're about to hit phase 2. The portals disappear, the beams disappear, the boss goes very purple, okay? There's no melee swings from the boss anymore. There's no threat from the boss anymore. The boss simply targets a random raid member and does a breath. The best strategy for this phase is to just stay as you are, but just spread 360 around the boss and get fairly close to the boss, because when he targets one person with his breath, that person wants to stand still and then everyone near them move. So he's doing a frontal cone. We don't really use that strategy in the footage here. We do a different one because we're doing like a beta strategy, because he was melee swinging during the beta, but we've not adjusted our strategy. You'd really need to jump into the green beam as well, quicker than I did, because the green beam heals him if no one's there to take it. And that's essentially Netherspite. People like to really overcomplicate Netherspite in my experience, but it's just get the two tanks alternating between red beam and blue beam. Red beam and green beam. God, I'm overcomplicating it. Have the two tanks alternate between red beam and green beam, okay? Like, it's easy. Just jump in and out of the green beam. Okay, that's 2/3 of the beams covered, right? And then you just have two people in blue beam, wait until the blue beam person gets 25 stacks, and then swap with someone else in the blue beam and let them get another 25 stacks. And then that's the beam phase over. And then have two more people take the next blue beam. The reason you can't take the same color beam back to back is because of the debuff. It lasts too long. Okay? And that's the fight. Avoid void zones, collect your loot, and go past collect $200. Okay, so finally, Nightbane. Well, we're going to run this video over an hour, but that's okay because this is the most difficult boss in Kara. Make sure that you're picking him up as soon as he lands. Make sure you have shield block up as soon as he lands. Do 2 or 3 globals to get some big threat, shield slam, revenge, devastate, and then think about your debuffs, thunderclap and demo shout. And the same applies for druid. Try and get your demo roar up within the first kind of like 6 globals or so, just so that you're confident that you have threat and then confident that you're staying alive. You do want to be using full consumables for this fight. You do want to be using armor potions on cooldown for this fight, at least initially. Notice on the video that I have run out of armor potions. Shush, I know, sorry. Lead by what I say, not what I do, okay? So he does a few things. He does a breath. He does a tail swipe. If anything, you want to face him a little bit further with his face to the raid. Like you see, he's facing off the edge of the walkway, the platform that he's on. I'll talk more about positioning in a second. So at 75% HP and every subsequent 25% HP, he flies up into the air. This is known as his air phase, okay? He's going to be summoning some adds. We trivialize it by having a blizzard or an improved blizzard and also a slow trap. No one's taking damage from these ads. They die incredibly quickly. I wouldn't expect every raid to be as smooth as this during the air phase. You're wanting to maybe mark a skull. You're also maybe wanting to actually tank them conventionally as a tank. The important thing is when he's landing, there's a threat reset. The threat reset occurs as soon as he targets somebody. Don't bother shield slamming until he has targeted somebody. You have less than a second to grab the boss before he runs over and kills a healer or someone with aggro. And then straight away it's back into defensive mode. Once you're happy with threat, get your Thunderclap and Demo Shout up. Make sure you've got an Armor Pot running, and don't let Commanding Shout fade as a warrior, okay? He does a Bellowing Roar, which can be danced as a warrior. It's got a fairly good cast time, so it gives you that wiggle room you need in order to dance to avoid getting feared. However, Tremors and Fear Ward can be used to alleviate and reduce risk of being feared. He does Charred Earth on the ground, which is this molten circle you see just in front of me. You don't want to be stood in that. If he does a Charred Earth on the tank position, you just run from, you just swap, you spin the boss 180. You stand with him facing the opposite side. So in the air phase, he's going to be spawning these Restless Skeletons. The Restless Skeleton ads have an aura which deals damage. So if you're stood next to one Restless Skeleton, it's going to be okay. You'll just take a small amount of damage from the aura. But if you're standing next to all 5 of the Restless Skeletons, you're going to be taking 5 times the damage from the aura. So be careful. War Stomp is very good. A Challenging Shout can be very good. Grenades are also very good. So he's landing, wait for him to target somebody, then Heroic Strike, Shield Slam. You do want to be mindful of any misses, dodge or parry you might get, and you might want to tell DPS just to hold off for a second. So you see the way I'm positioning him. My back is against the wall here, and the boss is perpendicular to the raid. There is a chance that the boss can still hit people in melee or even range with his tail swipe. So if I move myself slightly to my left, so I'm less concerned with the breath going on the raid. I'm more concerned with the tail whip going on the raid. It's much easier for range and melee to get hit by the tail swipe than it is for them to be hit by the breath. So bear that in mind when positioning him. Oh, there's the Bellowing Roar. Nice little stance, and, well, he's already gone into the next phase. This isn't the best footage to show you for a Nightbane, because we're absolutely destroying Nightbane. It would have been nicer to have perhaps seen a progression kill. But yeah, you can mark skull, as I am here on the Restless Skeleton. You can Zerg one of them down. You can really take your time on the Restless Skeletons. They are very scary, and this air phase generally is very scary. However, there is a saving grace. You have lots of time to kill these ads. We've got at least 10 seconds before the boss lands. Our damage could have been almost half, and we still would have killed the ads before he lands. Just play it calm, play it safe. You can use Shield Wall on any phase. You can also use Challenging Shout for the ads and to kite them back over the Frost Trap if they're running off the Frost Trap. Again, War Stomp and Grenades are extremely valuable. Also, have your Mage maybe spec Improved Blizzard. Blizzard's nice, but Improved Blizzard is better. Okay? And focus on the kiting. That's really good. The Blizzard will basically tank the mobs as well. It'll be top on threat from the Mage's Blizzard. Blizzard does a lot of threat. And again, remember Commanding Shout. Remember your armor potions. I hope this video has been helpful for you. This has been very off the cuff. I do apologize. I would have preferred to have done a more refined video for Kara, but Blizzard kind of released TBC quickly, so I wasn't able to do all of this ahead of launch. So thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, I hope this has helped you out with Kara. If you have any feedback, advice or comments, please let me know down below for future videos, future video ideas. I would love to read them. Subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content and want to see some more going forward. I will be doing future raids ahead of launch, so that would be good. And it's been a pleasure, and I'll catch you later. Take care.